This is a real honor to get to introduce a good friend of mine to you all today. I just hope that we're not wasting her time bringing her to Seattle, because here in Seattle, we were told by President Obama that we have the model of policing that we need to actually use to spread around the country. And our chief of police here in Seattle was flown out to the State of the Union address to sit in close proximity and then go to a party afterwards with the president and be congratulated for transforming the Seattle Police Department, right? And she came in from Boston, and the Seattle Police Department was under federal consent decree by the Department of Justice because 1 out of every 4 arrests in our city was shown to be a violation of that person's constitutional rights, and with an excessive use of force, and especially against black people and people of color in this city. So she came in as the great liberal reformer who's going to clean this all up, and was celebrated for her track record. That includes me getting pepper sprayed in the face on Martin Luther King Day for the crime of coordinating a ride to my son's birthday party. And then the chief directly intervening in my case to downgrade the punishment of the officer who sprayed me in the face from the amazing punishment of a 1-day suspension without pay to an oral reprimand, right? So I don't know if you'll have much to talk about in this city, but we'll see if we can find some stories of race and racism to discuss this evening. But I'm really thrilled to bring Keeanga here because she has been a long-time friend and comrade, and I've learned an incredible amount theoretically, historically, about how to engage in this struggle for black liberation from her many works that were previously read, publishing with The Guardian, the Black Agenda Report, the International Socialist Review, Al Jazeera America, and now if you haven't read the book yet, you have to get it and get it signed before the end of the evening. Just took my understanding to a whole different level of the project we so urgently need to engage in right here. Definitely in this country, definitely in this city where Che Taylor was just shot down and quote unquote executed, as the president of the NAACP put it, by Seattle police recently, right? So I think that there's one paragraph in this book that I want to read to you all before I bring her up to summarize, I think, the importance of what we can get from this talk and from engaging in deeper conversations about the conclusions of this book. And Keeanga writes, "The struggle for black liberation requires going beyond standard narratives that black people have come a long way, but we have a long way to go," which, of course, says nothing about where it is that we actually need to get to. It requires understanding the origins and the nature of black oppression and racism more generally. More importantly, it requires a strategy, some sense of how we get from the current situation to the future. Perhaps, at its most basic level, black liberation implies a world where black people can live in peace without the constant threat of social, economic, and political woes of a society that places almost no value on the vast majority of black lives. It would mean living in a world where black lives matter. And I think that that's really what I've gotten from this book, is not just the theoretical understanding for why I'm facing the oppression that I face and that we see in our schools and in our streets day in and day out, but also a plan of action for how we can collectively confront these institutions and tear them down. And I want to welcome Keeanga to share those lessons with us. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for coming out tonight. I'm going to speak probably for 35 minutes or so, and then we'll open up things for Q&A. And thanks to the Bookstore and people who put this together. I appreciate it. So I'll just start by saying, in writing this book, I basically, the publishers at Haymarket asked me in December of 2014 if I'd write the book, and I said no a couple of times. And then I decided that I wanted to really write the book that I wanted to read about what was happening. And I didn't really, I couldn't find something that was not just a kind of blow-by-blow account of Black Lives Matter, but really put this into some historical perspective and really raised the larger kind of political questions that I was looking for. And then there was a more immediate question that I had, which was, if people will recall, at the 2007-2008, when Barack Obama was running for president, that at least in the mainstream media, there was a bizarre discussion about whether or not the U.S. was entering into a post-racial period. In fact, in December of 2008, Forbes magazine actually ran an editorial that was headlined on the magazine that said, quote, "Racism in America is over," a month after Obama had been elected. And, so one of the questions I wanted to answer or to figure out was, how do we go from 2008 and, the public query as to whether or not racism in America could be on its deathbed, to the eruption first in Ferguson, August 9th, 2014, into a full-blown movement called Black Lives Matter. And so how do we understand those two things? And that question was really what drove me to write the book. And so really with this talk, I'm trying to go over some of the main themes of the book. And the first one is really dealing with that question about the relationship between the Obama presidency and the radicalization of black youth. So Forbes runs this headline, and I think while most African Americans did not accept that the country was moving beyond race, I think among almost all Americans, there was widespread optimism that Obama's victory indicated that the country was shedding its long history of racial injustice. How ironic then that over the last 19 months of Obama's presidency, we have witnessed the birth of a black social movement and the revival of radical black politics. The movement is known by its most popular slogan, Black Lives Matter. It's diffuse, angry, and has emerged in response to the continued plague of police murder, corruption, and violence throughout Black America. Black Lives Matter is not incidental to the Obama presidency, but in many ways it is a product of it. What do we make of the emergence of this movement during the ascendance of the nation's first black president? Certainly, the election of a black president in a country founded on the genocide of its native population and whose wealth was accumulated off of the enslaved labor of Africans was significant. But 8 years after the historic election of Barack Obama, very little has changed in the daily reality of most black people. Black unemployment is still almost twice the national average, despite constant talk of an economic recovery. 40% of black children continue to live in poverty. 55% of all black workers make under $15 an hour, but even more than the quotidian struggles to negotiate and manage poverty and economic inequality every day are the more dramatic examples of how black men, women, and children continue to suffer the humiliating indignities of racism and injustice. Whether it is a white Chicago police officer shooting 16 bullets into the prone and fetal body of a black teenager as he lay huddled on the street, or whether it is the poisoning of the water in Flint, Michigan, because the governor of the state assumed he could get away with it because the majority of the residents are poor and black. The persistence of these conditions, 8 years into the Obama administration, 51 years after the passage of the Voting Rights Act, 151 years after the end of the Civil War, and 150 years since the passage of the nation's very first Civil Rights Act that declared in 1866, quote, "Citizens of every race and color, without regard to any previous condition of slavery or involuntary servitude, shall have the same right in every state and territory in the United States to full and equal benefit of all laws and proceedings for the security of persons and property as it is enjoyed by white citizens." 150 years after that declaration, it inevitably raises the question of what is wrong with the United States, and why are the vast majority of black people treated as if they have no rights this country is bound to recognize or respect. The Black Lives Matter movement is a powerful intervention that is not only confronting the scourge of police terrorism, but it is also demanding that we consider what it would mean for black people to actually be free in this country. But on the eve of Obama's first inauguration, optimism was the prevailing mood. 69% of African Americans said that King's dream had been fulfilled. There were high expectations from black people that there would be a break with the politics of the past and that actual change was on the way. Obama's candidacy for president in 2007 did not begin with such high expectations. Black voters actually put their chips on Hillary Clinton as a sure bet. Obama then transformed his candidacy from the usual affair into something that he and his supporters would describe as a social movement. Obama tapped into the anger and exhaustion of ordinary Americans who were fed up with what seemed like endless war in the Middle East and Afghanistan, the complete incompetence of the federal government in reaction to Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, and the overall cynical nature of American politics. Recall how the soaring rhetoric of candidate Obama broke decisively with the status quo in American politics. Obama declared that we, ordinary people, were, quote, the change that we had been waiting for. Recall his impassioned pleas of yes, we can. But for black voters in particular, Obama's campaign represented the optimism of new beginnings, the belief that perhaps finally this country could fulfill its creed. Not only because he was black, but also because of what the Bush administration had represented. From the theft of the election in Florida in 2000, based on the disenfranchisement of black voters, to once again the collective shrug of the government in response to Hurricane Katrina, black voters turned out for Obama like never before. Young black voters produced the highest proportional voter turnout in the nation's history. For the first time, a higher percentage of eligible black voters supplanted the white electorate. But almost as quickly as Obama became president, so too did the disillusionment with his limitations. It was not all at once, but there were three significant markers for African Americans that pointed to continuity with the past, not the change that had been promised. The first factor was Obama's benign response to the economic crisis in black communities. By the end of 2008, the American economy was in free fall. African Americans would bear the brunt of the Great Recession and economic crisis that ensued. By the end, more than 240,000 black homeowners had lost their homes. By the fall of 2009, black unemployment had reached a high of 15%, fueled by cuts to federal and state government jobs that had always been a bedrock for black employment. Walmart became the largest employer of Black Americans, supplanting the historic role of work in the United States Postal Service. The net worth of Black families fell to $11,000 compared to $141,000 for whites. An alarming 40% of Black families had zero or negative wealth. It appeared that a Black president was right on time. Who better to understand how racial discrimination and inequality would create uneven access to programs intended to accelerate the economic recovery? And thus particular, or even yes, special provisions would have to be made to pull African Americans out of the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. But Obama preached that there was nothing in particular he could do for the growing numbers of Black poor, the Black unemployed, or Black homeowners. Instead, he insisted that, quote, a rising tide would lift all boats. A second factor contributing to Black disillusionment with the Black president was how he characterized Black poverty. Obama was reluctant to offer assistance to African Americans, but he did not show nearly the same reticence when it came to invoking the stale yet highly effective stereotypes of Blacks as somehow being responsible for their own condition. It was stunning. The entire Western world was blaming Wall Street for its reckless practices for almost crashing the entire global economy. In this country, that expression came through the Occupy movement that organized opposition to the growing gap between the rich and poor, or as the movement said, between the 1% versus the 99%. While it was often described as a white movement, polls found that 45% of African Americans expressed a positive view of Occupy, and an additional 35% said the movement was good for the American political system. And yet, even as the structural inequality of capitalism was exposed, Barack Obama scolded Black parents for feeding their kids cold fried chicken, for watching television instead of reading books, and indeed lectured Black America that there were, quote, no excuses for any predicament that Black people might find themselves in. Without question, some, if not many, Black people agreed with the criticism of the Black poor and working class. It fit the common sense of the last 40 years that African Americans are to blame for conditions that exist in Black communities, that Black people lack morality, personal responsibility, and in general, the personal character to overcome the hardships that everyone must endure to be successful, or so we are told. It is an argument that has been reinforced at every level of government, in the mass media, and in our popular culture. And yet for others, it was an argument that completely contradicted their experience. Black homeowners had played by the rules and were cashing in on the American dream, only to be bilked by mortgage lenders and dirty banking practices that left them penniless and homeless. Black college graduates who had played by the rules were still 3 times as likely to be unemployed as their white counterparts. Black men with no criminal record and looking for work were as likely to be called back as white men with a criminal record looking for work. Discrimination and other objective factors that had nothing to do with morality or personal responsibility were the culprits behind Black poverty. Finally, the growing excesses and brutality of the American criminal justice system, from violent policing to mass incarceration and beyond, drew attention to how much things had remained the same. The moments that Obama had to affirm Black concerns with what people were referring to as a criminal injustice system were ignored. For example, in September 2011, an international campaign was underway to save the life of wrongfully convicted Black death row inmate Troy Davis. Everyone from the Pope to the European Union to the governments of France and Germany, and even the former director of George Bush's FBI, campaigned to save Davis's life. The night that Davis was to be executed, hundreds of Black college students across Washington, D.C. marched and rallied at the Supreme Court and at the White House, hoping to lure Obama out of the White House to intervene in some way or another to save Davis's life. But Obama did nothing. He never even made a statement, instead opting to send his spokesperson out to the press to insist that this was a, quote, states' rights issue. For many, this had been the exact reason he had been elected, but instead it was more of the same. Finally, the murder of Trayvon Martin and the subsequent acquittal of George Zimmerman marked a clear rupture for some with the Obama administration. As the slow trickle of facts concerning the death of Martin began to come to light, it was clear that he had been the victim of an extralegal killing. Meanwhile, Florida officials coddled and protected George Zimmerman from arrest. With the spirit of militant protest having been aroused the previous fall by the Troy Davis demonstrations and the explosion of the Occupy Wall Street movement, marches, demonstrations, sit-ins, and occupations had been validated and were employed in the campaign to bring George Zimmerman to justice. Black and white activists who had been involved in Occupy connected with new people drawn into the streets by the horror of the murder of Trayvon Martin. As the protests swelled, Obama was finally forced to speak publicly. But in doing so, he only spoke personally, saying that if he had a son, he might look like Trayvon. Considered poignant by the media, it failed to articulate or resonate with growing Black anger against police misconduct in Florida and the refusal of officials to arrest Martin's killer. Eventually, George Zimmerman would be arrested, tried, and ultimately acquitted, as Trayvon Martin was transformed from a 17-year-old victim walking home to his father's house to a marijuana-smoking, oversized thug who was the aggressor. When the verdict was announced, Obama implored the public to respect the jury's decision, claiming, quote, "We are a nation of laws." What did this mean when the Martin case so clearly demonstrated that we are a nation with two sets of laws, one for Black people and one for everyone else? Everyone understood that if the tables had been turned, if Martin had violently set upon and shot and killed Zimmerman, he would have been arrested and immediately convicted. The raised expectations of Black people with the Obama presidency had been dashed over and over and over again. In the aftermath of the Zimmerman verdict, Alicia Garza, a labor organizer in the Bay Area, created the hashtag Black Lives Matter. Its declarative simplicity articulated the anger of a generation, and the pieces of a movement began to take shape. Not just with the development of the Black Lives Matter network and organization, but this was a time for the development of new organizations like the Dream Defenders in Florida and the Black Youth Project out of Chicago. In addition to local grassroots coalitions that came together to challenge police brutality in their own localities. What was clear was that the Black president and an unprecedented number of Black elected officials could not even perform the most basic task of keeping Black children safe from racist agents of the state. The young people would have to do it themselves. Why the issue of police brutality? Police violence against Black people is not new. In 1951, a multiracial contingent of activists in the Civil Rights Congress raised the slogan, "We charge genocide," to characterize the depth and consequences of police murder and the silent complicity of the state. The preamble of their petition read in part, quote, and again, this is 1951, "There was a time when racist violence had its center in the South. Once most of the violence against Negroes occurred in the countryside, but that was before the Negro immigrations of the 1920s and 30s. Now there is not a great American city, from New York to Cleveland or Detroit, from Washington, the nation's capital, to Chicago, from Memphis to Atlanta, or Birmingham, from New Orleans to Los Angeles, that is not disgraced by the wanton killing of innocent Negroes. It is no longer a sectional phenomenon. Once the classic method of lynching was the rope, now it is the policeman's bullet. To many an American, the police are the government, certainly its most visible representative. We submit that the evidence suggests that the killing of Negroes has become police policy in the United States, and that police policy is the most practical expression of government policy. Today, there is no shortage of issues that Black people in this country could mobilize around. But police brutality remains the catalyst for Black protest because it is the clearest example of the compromised citizenship of Black people. When the police can approach you, search you, arrest you, and even kill you with impunity, it means that you don't have first-class citizenship. You have second-class citizenship. And this second-class citizenship comes into sharp conflict with what the United States says about itself. And that is what drives the radicalization of young Black people and others who know it to be true. In other words, we as a nation are always told that this is the greatest country on earth. We believe in American exceptionalism and the promises of unfettered opportunity for anyone willing to work for it. We believe in the American dream. Just a few weeks ago, when Obama traveled to Cuba, he gave a speech to the Cuban public. Among many things, he said, quote, "I believe that every person should be equal under the law. Every child deserves the dignity that comes with education and health care and food on the table and a roof over their heads. American democracy has given our people the opportunity to pursue their dreams and enjoy a high standard of living." I mean, as an aside, there's something insidious about the American president lecturing Cubans about education and healthcare, for one. It's the most educated population on the planet, and yeah, so that's an aside. But really, the notion of American democracy, what on earth do these words mean to the family of Tamir Rice, the 12-year-old boy who was shot and killed by police within 1.6 seconds of their arrival on the scene? What does it mean when the cops who killed him face no charges for doing so? What does it mean to Ayanna Jones, a 7-year-old girl who was sleeping on her grandmother's couch when the police raided the house in a botched raid in the wrong house and killed her? What does it mean that those officers face no charges? Far from a democracy where everyone can pursue their dreams, the movement has exposed what the vast majority of Black people in America know to be true, that in inner cities across this country, there exists a police state where the police are governed by a completely different set of rules, where they can kill, often with impunity, where they are empowered to do what they want, when they want, all with the intention of maintaining discipline and control over the country's Black population. Don't take my word for it. A commission created by Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel in the wake of the killing of 17-year-old Laquan McDonald just released its report last week and found, among many things, quote, that outrage regarding McDonald's death exposed deep and long-standing fault lines between Black and Latino communities on the one hand and the police on the other, arising from police shootings to be sure, but also about daily pervasive transgressions that prevent people from all ages, races, ethnicities, and gender across Chicago from having basic freedom of movement in their own neighborhoods, stopped without justification, verbally and physically abused, and in some instances arrested and then detained without counsel. Chicago Police Department's own data gives validity to the widely held belief that police have no regard for the sanctity of life when it comes to people of color. This is from an official commission report, a commission that activists in Chicago protested because they were all hand-picked people by Rahm Emanuel. So this is what Rahm Emanuel's handpicked people are saying about the police in Chicago. But if you think that's an exaggeration, then consider this. Since January of 2015, American police have killed 1,405 people. According to the findings of a study conducted by the Bureau of Justice Statistics on police homicides, in the years 2003 to 2009 and 2011, American police killed 7,427 people. That is an average of 928 people a year. If we include the last 4 years, American police will have been responsible for killing more than 11,000 people. In 2015, when the Guardian newspaper began to keep track of police killings, they found that young black men aged 15 to 34 were 9 times more likely than other Americans to be killed by police. Consider that 22 American soldiers were killed in Afghanistan last year, or that 25 people were killed by law enforcement in Canada in 2015. In the last 24 years, police in England have killed 55 people. By January 31st of this year, American police had already killed 89 people. In Germany, the police killed no one in 2013 and 2014. In China, with a population 4.5 times the size of the United States, the police killed 12 people in 2014. And this is only a fraction of what we know. There are 18,000 police departments in the United States, and only 1,000 of them bother to report to the federal government how many people they kill each year. The New York City Police Department, for example, has not reported on how many civilians it has killed since 2007. The state of Florida does not report at all. So we have a very limited view of the extent of police homicide in the United States. And because of the lack of consistent tracking, we have no idea what proportion of these deaths are incurred by African Americans or Latinos. The police in the U.S. have always been an oppressive institution, but these practices have become worse and more widespread recently. The increasing brutality of police have coincided with the attrition of the already weak American welfare state. The political establishment, in its Republican and Democratic clothing, is gutting our cities and neighborhoods. When you close public schools and mental health clinics, cut funding for public hospitals and public libraries, when you cut welfare, housing assistance, and food stamps in the midst of a job crisis, when there are already 50 million poor people in the United States, you are creating the conditions for crime. Policing has become the public policy of last resort, intended to contain crime to certain neighborhoods, not actually stop it. For example, the section of Baltimore where young Freddie Gray was picked up, yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of the beginning of the Baltimore uprising that went from April 27th to the end of the month. So we're still in the midst of that anniversary. The neighborhood where Freddie Gray lived, where he was picked up by police, was included 21% of the people in that neighborhood were unemployed. 25% of the buildings were abandoned and in a state of disrepair. The life expectancy in Freddie Gray's neighborhood was 6 years shorter than the rest of Baltimore. 55% of families in Freddie Gray's neighborhood lived on less than $25,000 a year. 3 weeks before Freddie Gray was killed, police were instructed to increase their presence and arrest on the corner that Freddie Gray was picked up on. The police have been inserted where the rest of the state has failed its citizens. This key role played by the police in governing our cities today means that they are a protected class, governed by a separate set of rules and regulations. This is why mayors and city council people regularly turn a blind eye to brutal policing. brutal policing is simply the cost of doing business. And the cost of doing business is quite high. In the city of Chicago alone, they have spent $500 million over the last 10 years to settle or pay out lawsuits against the city for police brutality and wrongful death suits. The New York City Police Department has averaged $100 million settlements for police brutality and wrongful death lawsuits a year over the last decade, adding up to $1 billion. The 10 cities with the largest police departments paid out $248 million last year in settlements and court judgments in police misconduct cases, up 48% from 2010. In the last 5 years, those same 10 cities have paid out $1.2 billion. Any other public institution that incurred that kind of expense or deficit would have its budgets cut, its services shrank, or the institution itself would be shut down. When the Chicago Board of Education claimed it was running a $1 billion deficit, they simply closed 52 schools and never looked back. In 2013. Also in Philadelphia, the same thing. They closed 30 schools and never looked back. Policing in the United States has nothing to do with crime. As activists and radicals, we don't need to deny that crime is an issue in the lives of working class and poor people. But crime is a product of poverty and economic inequality. We live in the richest country in the history of the world. If the United States wanted to end poverty in this country tomorrow, it could. Since the economy crashed in 2008, the federal government has spent close to $4 trillion in a bailout of the nation's financial sector. The federal government spent $438 billion alone to bail out Citibank. $4 trillion, if you can even wrap your mind around that figure, could transform every school, provide health care for all, provide housing for millions, end food insecurity, and upend the kind of economic inequality that produces crime in the first place. But while it was determined that the banks were too big to fail, our public hospitals, schools, and other vital institutions were and continue to be too insignificant to save. Instead of money and resources being dedicated to eradicating poverty, we get policing and more policing. And the logic of policing only begets more policing as elected officials create political value out of rising arrest rates and falling crime rates by aggressively tracking police statistics and turning them into campaign fodder. Police are rewarded not for stopping crime, but for making arrests. And finally, as revenue streams have tightened in American cities, as no American politician will take responsibility for raising taxes, law enforcement has become a de facto way for municipalities to raise funds on the backs of the politically weak and vulnerable. In city after city, there is a reliance on red light cameras, endless tickets, fines, and fees that have turned into a municipal lifeline. New York City profits from $10 million a week in parking tickets. The city also made almost $1 billion a year in court and administrative fines. These, of course, create incentives for the police to target people and entire neighborhoods as sources of income for the city. And encounters with the police of this nature, of course, then envelop people into the criminal justice system, thereby making it even harder to get a job or maintain any level of economic stability. In other words, ending police terrorism also means recognizing it as the logical outcome of a brutal society that willfully turns a blind eye to inequality and injustice. It means that police brutality and murder are not the products of bad police, but they are built into a system that actually has no solution to racism, poverty, and inequality. Instead, the system and its representatives manage the products of inequality. It is for this reason that there has never been a golden age of policing that any of us can point to as a place to get back to when the police were not violent and abusive. Such a period does not exist. The need to build a larger movement to address these issues is not something to suggest so that we can all get along and feel good about ourselves. It is really about coming to terms with the enormity of our task when we talk about ending police violence in our communities. For as much as the movement has accomplished in exposing the issue of police violence, we are also right now witnessing the resilience and determination of the political establishment to protect criminal killer cops. There are several examples of this, whether it is the killer of Akai Gurley, a black man in a housing project in New York City. A cop shot his gun into a dark hallway and ends up killing this young man, and the cop gets 5 years of probation. We can see it in the refusal to indict Tamir Rice's killers. We can see it in the decision to grant bail to Michael Slager, who is the cop in South Carolina who shot down Walter Scott 8 times in the back as Walter Scott ran away. The judge in the bail hearing said of Michael Slager that he felt sorry for him and the fact that he had been separated from his family so long and decided to give him bail. We can see it when Rahm Emanuel appoints a new police superintendent who in his first public utterances said that in his 27 years as a cop in Chicago, he has never seen an incident of police misconduct. We can see the resilience in a recent decision of a San Francisco judge to reinstate police officers who exchanged texts that declared, among other things, white power, all niggers must hang, and niggers should be spayed. We can see it in the decision to grant bail to Jason Van Dyke, who killed Laquan McDonald. We can see it in the fact that 14 months have passed since Obama's commission produced a report on improving policing in the 21st century. That report included 59 recommendations, not a single one of which has been implemented since that report came out in March of 2015. We can see it in the simple fact that in this year, the police have killed approximately 80 people a month since January. The political establishment, led by Barack Obama, is always willing to throw together a commission, invite activists to a round table, and unveil countless studies with the objective of creating the illusion that something is happening. And they try and convince the rest of us that something is progress. But what we are confronting is a systemic, rooted, and institutional feature of racism and oppression in this society. And it requires a political strategy that can challenge it, but also look behind it. And just to end, I'm just going to read a couple of pages out of this about the movement in response in that, in terms of the political strategy. This is from chapter 6, Black Lives Matter, a movement, not a moment. Protests can expose these conditions that I've described in their relationship to the policing state. Protests can draw in larger numbers of people. Protests can compel public figures to speak against those conditions. Protests can do many things, but protest alone cannot end police abuse and the conditions that are used to justify it. The movement against police brutality, even in its current inchoate state, has transformed how Americans see and understand policing in the United States. Over the course of a year, Black people from coast to coast have led a struggle to expose the existence of an urban police state with suburban outposts. It has shown that the country, the depths of the lie that we live in a colorblind or post-racial society. 83% of Americans say racism, quote, still poses a problem. That is up 7% from 2014. 61% of whites and 82% of blacks agree, quote, that there is a need for a conversation about race in American life. In less than a year, the number of white Americans who view police killings as isolated incidents has fallen from 58% to 36%. At the same time, in July 2015 alone, the police killed an astonishing 118 people, the most that had been killed over the entire year. By mid-August, they had killed another 54. On the anniversary of Mike Brown's death, Ferguson police shot and critically injured another black teenager. In New York City, where there was a vibrant anti-police brutality movement for years before the most recent iteration of the national movement, liberal Mayor Bill de Blasio has pledged to hire 1,000 new police. This was surprising, since de Blasio rode the success of the campaign to end stop and frisk into office in 2013. This is only one example of how resilient the police are as an institution, but it also shows elected officials' reluctance to discipline them. The movement is confronted with many challenges, but it also has shown that it will not go away easily. This has less to do with the organizing genius of organizers than with the deep anger among ordinary blacks who have been beaten, imprisoned, humiliated, and abused, all the while being blamed for their own victimization. The power of ordinary black people to push the movement forward was seen in June 2015 in McKinney, Texas, when the police attacked several black children at a swimming party, including 15-year-old Dejaria Becton, who was manhandled by one police officer in particular. In years past, a story like this would have resulted in little, if any, attention. Instead, a few days later, hundreds of black and white protesters filled the streets of the small suburban development where the children had been set upon, chanting, "We want to go swimming," and "No swimming, no driving." It must have been a powerful scene to everyone who witnessed it, and for different reasons. Many of the suburban white neighbors who had supported the police were outraged, but could do nothing about it. They had been rendered powerless. The police were undoubtedly intimidated by the action, so much so that the most aggressive cop who had attacked Becton was forced to resign days later. Most importantly, though, for the black children who had been abused and threatened at gunpoint by the police, and for their parents, to have hundreds of people show up to insist that their lives mattered must have repaired some part of the damage. For them to see the solidarity of hundreds of white people must have given them some hope that not all whites are racist, and that some would even stand up and fight alongside them. The demonstration may have also validated their right to resist and stand up to racism and racist violence, and affirmed that they were right to protest from the very beginning. The Black Lives Matter movement, from Ferguson to today, has created a feeling of pride and combativeness among a generation this country has tried to kill, imprison, and simply disappear. The power of protest has been validated. For it to become even more effective, to affect the policing state, and to withstand opposition and attempts to infiltrate, subvert, and undermine what has been built, there must be more organization and coordination in the move from protest to movement. Thank you.